Hello, my name is Jonathan Potter at the OECD. I was responsible for managing and directing this research project on entrepreneurship and regional innovation clusters in Thailand, where we take the case of the advanced agriculture and biotech and food for the future sectors in Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai, where we see this emerging regional innovation cluster. I'll take you quickly through some of the highlights of this report. So it's a report about how to build a regional innovation cluster, how to strengthen what we already have there in advanced agriculture and biotechnology and food for the future in Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai. There are four key chapters here. One is an assessment of the regional entrepreneurial ecosystem, the barriers in culture, skills, in finance and other areas. A second thematic chapter looks at business development services, consultancy and advice to SMEs and how appropriate the current arrangements are for building the cluster. The third chapter looks at the role that foreign direct investment could play in the development of the cluster. And the fourth major thematic section is on the whole functioning of the cluster, its networking, its development, and the new industry pathways that it could introduce. There are many policy recommendations throughout each of these chapters. The main overall finding is that Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai regions are a potential stronghold for internationally competitive advanced agriculture and biotech and food for the future products. This is potentially an internationally competitive regional innovation cluster. It's based on, in particular, the public R&D investments that are paying off very well with new knowledge in these areas, in cosmetics, in functional food, and so on. The innovations that are being generated by public research organizations, universities, and in science parks in these regions. So there's a great basis for innovative, high value added industry development. But more support is needed to provide the right growth-oriented finance and advice to startups and scale-ups, to new startup enterprises, to SMEs that can scale up and go into international markets with these new products based on biotechnology and other key enabling technologies. And the support is needed to provide the finance, the advice, and the links to the sources of innovation for those ambitious entrepreneurs. The key messages in terms of how to go about doing this is that we need a twofold strategy. Part one is to develop a new fast-track strand of SME support for firms identified as having growth potential that will innovate, that will export. And for these firms, we need a specialized, high-quality set of advice, finance, and innovation assistance. And the other part of the strategy is to build a new regional innovation clusters policy. We recommend regional cluster management organizations who will have people acting as cluster management agents, and they will identify high potential entrepreneurs and SMEs and link them up together and link them up to sources of technology and business development knowledge. Some key recommendations from the report here. One is to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There are different aspects to this, but it is important to get the growth finance into firms. There is access to finance support for SMEs, but there's very little that's actually targeted on these high growth potential firms. The opportunities for business angel funding, for crowdfunding, are not yet being fully exploited. In terms of business development services, again, there's support available already through NSTDA, through OSMAP, through others, but it's not intensive enough, it's not high enough quality, it's not specialist enough to help these firms to overcome their big innovation and exporting challenges. But what we recommend for this is to introduce business development services vouchers. And this would enable the firm identified as having high potential to approach with their voucher a high quality provider who could be in the private sector to provide support for their growth. In terms of FDI, what we see is that biotechnology clusters like this tend not to be kick-started at the outset by FDI, but rather they tend to attract the FDI as they grow. So here the priority is to build those conditions that will attract FDI locally, to build skills, to build research, to build companies, and to make them visible and market them to foreign investors. And then thirdly, to create an overarching regional cluster management organization for advanced agriculture and biotech and food for the future in the north, but potentially also for other regions. These organizations should employ cluster management agents, and these agents should be involved in identifying high potential firms and putting them together with support for skills development and for innovation. So we also provide a number of international examples of policy practices, programs that have been developed in other countries that actually have the same objectives as what we're proposing for Thailand. So an example is the Small Business Administration in the US. It integrates business development services into its regional cluster programs. It funds these regional cluster organizations to provide business development services to SMEs. Another example, one of many in the report, could be the Norwegian Innovation Cluster Program. It provides long-term funding to cluster organizations to enable them to employ cluster management agents and to undertake applied research projects involving groups of SMEs and universities. So thank you very much. That's the agenda as we see it. That's the report. We wish you the greatest success with this exciting agenda.